Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back. My name is Sarita. I have a very strange video for you today. I don't really have a candle to review for you at all, so if that doesn't interest you, pass on by. You can catch one of those other candle reviews. I was reading my Cooks Illustrated that just came in the mail a couple days ago. This is for July and August. I've been reading Cooks Illustrated and Cooks Country for like years and years. I'm a huge fan. And I read something about almonds that I wanted to share with you. And I had a little bit of a eureka moment as I was reading it, because I think that it may have some payoffs for home fragrance and for candles. But disclaimer, I'm conjecturing quite a bit. So I want to share with you some information which is probably very factual, and then some information which is really not. And it's just my conjectures about how these almond factoids might relate to what it is that you smell in an almond flavored scented candle. Because I have noticed, by the way, this is very much in the vein of like Josh from Touch the Fire Twice, who goes into these exhaustive, things about the backgrounds of fragrance notes. I tend to not dig quite that deep when I do reviews. Not that they're not long in and of themselves, but I don't dig quite that deep. But this is definitely in that category of like background information on how we procure fragrances or flavors from natural botanical elements and the variations thereof. Yes. By the way, I do have some iced coffee here, but I brought my Di Serono as well because it's an amaretto almond. So I felt like that was really appropriate. Oh gosh, that lid is so pointy. So I'm just gonna go ahead and give myself a very generous pour of Di Serono here as I continue on. I also brought my almond extract here from Trader Joe's so that we could talk about it. So I wanna talk about this for a second. I was thinking, okay, so in recent memory, I did have remember the Aldi candle that's like, I think it's called white almond blossom or it's a white almond candle. And it's like got a cult following, this white almond candle from Aldi's that makes its appearance every now and then. And when I encountered it for the first time, after all the hype of this candle, I smelled it and I was like, this just smells straight up like almond extract. Do you want a candle that smells like almond extract in your house? Well, then you know where to turn, right? And there are certain candles that advertise that they're almond candles, or even pistachio, but almond specifically. And I've noticed that some candles will smell more like almond extract, and then some almond candles will smell roasty and toasty like the almond itself, or like any other kind of nut, peanut, hazelnut, whatever else, right? And I've always kind of wondered about that. And I've always kind of wondered about almond extract, period, because while I love almond extract, when I smell almond extract, yes, it's kind of almondy, but it's kind of like a horse of a different color at the same time. It's like something really strange. And obviously with an extract, there's like some amount of alcohol present too, which gives it like a liqueur-ness, but it's so sweet. And there's also, people have said that it kind of reminds them of cherry, or sometimes cherry fragrances will remind them of almond. I've never had that so much, but when I smell almond extract, I can understand what it is that they're saying about that. So anyway, I've always been a little bit interested into how almond extract comes to be, why people often associate it with cherries, why almond extract smells significantly different than like when you cut up or chop almonds, for instance, or you slice them or whatever else. What the situation is. There was also that Bath and Body Works candle, the new one in the fall, which was toasted pumpkin butter, I think, or something like that. And everybody was like, it doesn't smell like toasted. It doesn't smell like a butter, like a nut butter or like a toasted nut butter at all. And then I noticed that on the label, it had almonds on it. And I thought there was a back note of something that smelled like almond extract. And I said at the time, I think this is actually more like a pumpkin amaretto than it is like a nut butter, because a nut butter doesn't smell like that, but amaretto does smell more like almond extract. And so it's only associated to a toasted pumpkin butter or a nut butter insofar as it's related to an extract, an almond extract, or a nut extract, which almost seems like a different entity in and of itself. Anyway, I apologize if this is like a lot of preamble. I've just always been curious about them, period. And also curious about various different candles that I smell that advertise them as being a nut and then can either lean extract like or like in real life kind of toasted, roasted, eating out of your hand kind of a nut. There just seem to be almost two different, it's like a bifurcated like genre there. And they don't bear a whole lot of relationship to each other. And I have found that I tend to discount, or the candles that I associate as being more cheap lean more toward the extract. And the ones that I consider to be true nut candles are the ones that lean more toward that roasty, toasty vibe. And sometimes the best of them combine some aspect of both? Question mark. Have you ever like asked yourself about that? Anyway, I was reading my Cooks Illustrated this morning, and they have this month for July, August. They're talking about this like French croissant dessert, which you know how like when you get a French almond croissant, it's like the croissant and then they've got that like almost marzipan like quality in the almond croissant with the toasted stuff on top, you know? Anyway, they're just showing you how to make it with like a brioche toast, yeah, which is a lot easier obviously than procuring or having to make, God forbid, like an actual authentic croissant. By the way, I've been noticing that there's a lot of like brioche bread is like trending even in regular like Kroger grocery stores. So it would be easy to make it. I think I'm going to keep the recipe because I do love myself an almond croissant, right? Anyway, so then at the back of the magazine, they were explaining in this little blurb here why you need almond extract for almond flavor. So when you make a frangipane or something similar to a marzipan, you do need almond flour, you do need ground almonds, but you also need a touch of almond extract to really get that familiar almond taste that you associate with like an almond pastry, yeah? And so they were trying to explain why it is that you do need a touch of almond extract along with the authentic ground almonds. It says many almond flavored desserts and pastries include almond extract, even if they also include almonds. And we found that extract was essential to create the distinctive flavor we associate with almond pastries when we're making frangipane. And here's why. The almonds we eat out of hand, the ones that you eat from the grocery store, are so-called sweet varieties, while extract is made from cooked bitter almonds. So there's two different varieties of almonds. Actually, the most common one is sweet almonds. But then there's like this genetic mutation that can happen to very specific varieties. Sometimes it can happen to individual trees, just a random mutation. But then there are actual scientifically observed, like at least one variety that is just always bitter. It's always bitter. And these are poisonous almonds. These are not almonds that you buy from the store. The bitter almonds cannot be eaten raw because they contain, which makes them bitter, this, oh, by the way, it says it here. They have a high concentration of a volatile compound called benzaldehyde. okay? We don't eat uncooked bitter almonds since when they form benzaldehyde, they also form cyanide, which makes them poisonous to consume raw. And I saw it in some research because then I was interested, so I Googled. A child, if they eat like 7 of these bitter almonds, they can die. Like they're that poisonous, yeah? That makes them the bitter. Now, the almond extract they make from the bitter. They don't make them from the sweet. They make them from these bitter, but of course they're cooked. So the essence of the cooked, not raw, the essence of the cooked bitter almonds is what gives us almond extract. And it's a different flavor, obviously, than the sweet ones, although related because they are of the same species. Yes? Bitter almonds have a floral cherry-like flavor due to this benzaldehyde. And then interestingly, most pure almond extracts, which are made, by the way, from alcohol, water, and this distilled bitter almond oil, don't get all their flavor from the bitter almonds. Bitter almonds are the kernels of a stone fruit. It's actually a stone fruit that's related to apricots and peaches and cherries. Since these kernels of these other fruits are also a good source of this same benzaldehyde, they are also bitter, their oils are often used either in combination with almond oil or even instead of it to make the almond extract that we get in the store. So literally you have a very good percentage of a chance if with any pure almond extract that you buy from the grocery store, it is probably a combination of both bitter almond oil and bitter apricot pit oil or cherry or whatever else. And some, in fact, may not contain any bitter almond oil at all because apparently those pits are very, very similar in the way that they come across, which is kind of a nutty, sweet fruitiness. Yeah? Super interesting. So that is why cherry and almond often smell very similar to people. In personal fragrance, in home fragrance, even when you're smelling like in the culinary world, you're smelling an extract. That's why an almond extract will sometimes smell cherried to you. Yeah? Super interesting. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so here's the upshot of all of that, is that I think the candles that smell more like almond extract, and the reason why sometimes cheaper candles that advertise that they're nuts smell more like almond extract than an actual nut, is because I suspect, and this is a conjecture, I suspect that it is easier to get a fragrance oil that smells like an almond extract oil. That those two are probably very similar, and it's easy to distill down that cooked like bitter almond taste or smell. That is much easier to replicate in home fragrance because it's already a distilled oil. Whereas to capture the fragrance of a roasty, toasty nut is actually much harder to do. That's not distilled down. That's just something that like exists and you smell it and you're trying to duplicate it with a fragrance oil. I suspect that's much harder to do. And do you remember when I think Kent from Candle Channel was talking about how they make the pumpkin nut butter or whatever it is? Pumpkin brittle. That's it. The pumpkin brittle, very popular Bath and Body Works candle. And the creator of that fragrance said that she uses sesame oil to make what smells like a roasty, toasty peanut, because sesame oil actually does, it's a distilled oil fragrance or flavor that does smell roasty and toasty, as opposed to what this smells like, which is fruity and yeah. So she uses sesame oil whenever she has to make a peanut kind of candle. I suspect it's because it's very difficult to get a roasty, toasty nut extract to work for home fragrance. And you have to kind of work all the way around and may not. So if you want a roasty, toasty almond fragrance, that may not exist. You may have to use some sort of like a cord that may use like a sesame oil or something like that. Nothing even related to almond to be able to get that. Whereas almond extract, which is also associated with almonds, is so much easier to acquire and to throw into a candle, right? But it's not the same roasty toasty. Anyway, all of a sudden I just started thinking, this is why that pumpkin nut butter from last year was so disappointing, because everybody expected it to be roasty toasty, like a nut butter or like nuts that you would chop up, or like a peanut butter or something like that. But instead they went for an extract as opposed to like sesame or something like that. But given the fact that they do the pumpkin nut brittle with the sesame oil, I bet Bath & Body Works thought that if they added sesame oil or tried to simulate something like that in that candle, it would just be a straight up dupe for pumpkin brittle, which is what they use the sesame oil for. So there was just no point in going that direction. Everybody would just say, it's the same thing as pumpkin brittle. So they were trying to make it a different kind of nut butter, but then they had to go to extract in order to do that, which made it not, anyway, I apologize. This is super nerdy and I don't know if this is interesting to you at all, but I find it super interesting. So this is why, by the way, like extracts, this is why like your almond fragrances are associated with cherry or sometimes with almond and apricot, which I hadn't even thought of, but those stone fruits, which actually makes a great deal of sense to me because I've always thought in the culinary world, like an apricot tart, for instance, like an apricot goes really well with almond and with almond extract, and peach sometimes the same way. Those two work really well. And now I know it's because like the apricot and peach pits are actually really similar to like a nutty almond. And that's why they like go so well together. Also, I brought this random candle, which is actually one of my favorite candles I've ever burned. And I stopped burning it halfway through because I need to keep it forever, from Aldi, once again. This was several years ago. It was one of their limited editions and it's called Apricot and Oud. And I swear this is one of the best candles I've ever smelled in my life. Sometimes I just keep it in my drawer and every now and then I'm like, I started putting it in the crock, which is why it lost its wick, because it wasn't burning particularly well. And I love the fragrance so much. And now I'm just keeping it forever because I'm so afraid I'll never find it again. Aldi has never brought it back. Guys, if you ever see this candle out in the wild, will you tell me? I will buy it on the black market. I will buy it from you if you still have it. Oh my gosh. If I had known, if I had burned it before it sold out, I would have gone to every Aldi in like the tri-state area and bought an entire case of them. Anyway, I think part of the reason that I love this candle so much is because while it is fruity in a much vaguer kind of sense. And the apricot note here is a little bit floral and a little bit nutty, which goes toward kind of an apricot extract, which is much more similar to like an almond extract. And up against the wood and the musk, it's just intoxicating. Oh, anyway, this is just a revelation to me. If you've ever wondered, two things. If you've ever wondered what the relationship is between almond and cherry, apricot, peach, this is the connection. And if you've ever wondered why some candles smell like almond extract and some smell like actual almond nuts, here's the reason. Because the actual almond nut is in fact a completely different almond variety, number one. And number two, it's probably not even almond. It's probably like a sesame oil or something like that, which is meant to simulate a roasty, toasty, sweet nut. Oh, so interesting. And like I said, some good almond candles are a combination of both, just like the great almond pastries are a connection of both. We kind of crave both of those things together. It adds a certain kind of dimension to the roasty toastiness if it's a specific kind of nut, like an almond, because then you can put in that like sweet, like fruity, floral aspect too, which is just so amazing. I thought this was amazing and so interesting. Thank you, Cooks Illustrated, and I feel informed. Probably Josh has already talked about this in many of his videos about almonds, but I haven't watched it, so I just thought I would offer it to you. Thanks for joining me for that fun video. Maybe I'll entitle it, Did You Know? I can't say that I will have many videos like this because I generally don't go deep like this, but it just triggered something for me, so I thought I would bring it to you. I will have actual candle reviews coming up, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for joining me this morning. Let me know if you thought this was interesting, if you already knew it, if it's like triggered anything for you in terms of the almond or nut candles that you own, that you've burned recently, etc. I would love to know. Thanks so much. I'll see you guys in the next one.